I've come to the floor to discuss the current state of the private, publicly owned, for-profit health insurance industry and the ways this system, I believe, must be changed during healthcare reform. Bottom line, our country is the biggest healthcare spender in the world. In return, we get very average results. And it wasn't always this way in America. The American Medical Association described it this way, and I quote, "The United States is headed toward a system dominated by a few publicly traded companies that operate in the interest of shareholders and not primarily in the interest of patients."
Welcome to another episode of Outside Counsel. I'm your host, Jeffrey B. Simon. Today, I am thrilled to welcome an extraordinary individual who has not only faced the formidable Blue Cross Blue Shield, but conquered them against all odds. Our guest, the resilient Robert Skeeter Salim, is not just a name, he's a symbol of triumph. After receiving a shocking diagnosis of stage 4 throat cancer, Skeeter's oncologist recommended proton radiation therapy, a life-saving treatment his healthcare provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield, shockingly denied. But Skeeter was no ordinary patient. He was, in fact, an aggressive trial lawyer who had been named one of the 100 best such trial lawyers in America. He helped to obtain settlements worth hundreds of millions of dollars from large corporations that he claimed had harmed consumers with unsafe products like pelvic mesh and the pain reliever Vioxx. As a celebrated litigator with a vast expertise in class action litigation and a founding partner of the firm Salim Beasley, Skeeter is an absolute force to be reckoned with and exactly the right person to undertake this battle.
I am 72 years old. I've been practicing law for 47 years. Live in a little town called Natchitoches, Louisiana, part of the year. I live in Houston the rest of the time with my wife and 5-year-old daughter. Hobbies are golf and politics, and love to practice the law. Plan on doing it as long as I can physically do it.
I want to be careful with this question, but you chose to have another child 5 years ago. Will you share some details with us about that?
My wife had never had a child. I have 3 adult children. So we adopted young Olivia at 1 day old, and she's just been an absolute joy. She came along right when the cancer came on. So she had a rough first year with me, but she's fantastic.
Oh, that is incredible. Wow. Now, your friends call you Skeeter, and I appreciate you letting me do that. Where does the nickname come from?
Just at birth, they named me Skeeter, and I never knew any other name. In fact, I got in trouble at school the first year because I was at a Catholic school, and the nuns kept calling me Robert, and I wouldn't answer. They sent me to the principal's office and said I had to start answering, and I said, no, I'm Skeeter. I'm not Robert. So they finally gave in because I guess it was either that or me get kicked out of school.
Oh, I love that. You mentioned that you've been a lawyer 47 years. Do I understand you're a plaintiff's lawyer like I am?
Yes, always been a plaintiff lawyer from day one.
In what kinds of cases, and I'm sure there have been many, but what types of larger cases have you handled over the years?
Started out doing everything, soft tissue, workman's comp, tried 20 jury trials, the verdict in 1 year when we tried comp cases and soft tissue cases, and then started doing some offshore cases, then graduated into products liability cases. And then about 22 years ago, started doing the mass tort cases. And then the last 15 years, do a lot of governmental cases for attorney generals trying to recover overcharges and bad conduct on behalf of the pharmaceutical companies.
Now, I understood from a little bio I got that you've been active in Vioxx litigation. Is that right?
Yeah, we were not one of the major players in Vioxx, but we were very active in it. We were one of the co-leads nationwide on transvaginal mesh. We were one of the co-leads on Plavix. And recently, we were one of 3 co-leads on the JCCP in California on the Juul litigation, which just successfully completed the vaping cases.
So you've been dedicated to trying to improve public health through the civil justice system.
I like cases that I feel are righteous. My friend Mark Lanier and I do a lot of governmental cases together, and we were talking the other day about how much more fun it is to handle a case that is righteous and that we feel good about. We represent who we're supposed to represent, but when you have a case you really feel strongly about, it really makes it more pleasurable.
It's funny, it's a small world, not just in Natchitoches, but in the world of plaintiffs lawyers who do mass tort, although I never had the privilege of meeting you before now. Mark Lanier is my close friend too, and my co-counsel in opioid litigation.
Oh, okay. He and I are really involved in this PBM litigation, pharmacy benefit management, where we alleging and think we're absolutely correct that they're running the prices of the drugs just terribly. Prime example, the price of insulin is at one time was $200. The insulin manufacturers, there's 3 main ones, Sanofi, Nova, and Aventis, we're making between $65 and $80. PBMs were making $130 and they produce nothing. Now, through the government pressure, the price of insulin is down to $35, but for 15 years, people had to either try to ration insulin or go without it. People lost legs and people died from it.
Drug companies price gouging diabetic with essential medication.
Correct.
Not only want to get to know you better just because I'm fascinated by what you do for a living, but also because I'm aware that a little over 5 years ago, something dramatic happened to you that then led to a cascade of unexpected twists and turns. And I was wondering if you would share some of those details with our audience.
I was at a tennis tournament with some of my old tennis buddies in New York and started feeling really poorly. Came back and went to Ready Wellness Center. I had a bunch of tests and he didn't like the results. I had a CAT scan that same day. It showed a mass in my artery. And so I went to a Dr. Pasha, who's a big time ENT doctor here in Houston. And he looked in there and he said, "You have throat cancer." And I said, "How do you know that without doing a biopsy?" And he said, "I've seen over 1,000 of these and I've never seen one not cancerous." So he was connected with MD Anderson, and the very next day I was at MD Anderson evaluation, and they spent probably 3 weeks doing scan after scan to try to determine the right treatment. And that's when they came up that the tumor had grown too large to do surgery. It was in a position that they felt like radiation with chemo as a secondary treatment was the only way to save my life.
Wow. So just to break out some of those details, you were at the U.S. Open in Flushing Meadow with a bunch of buddies because you're a tennis fan.
Correct.
And you noticed you were just feeling wrong.
Yeah, I was feeling lethargic, which is not like me. And, the pharmaceutical lawyer almost got me in trouble. I was taking Xarelto for AFib. I just had an ablation. They want you on blood thinner for a year. Knowing that I had handled 1,500 Xarelto cases, I knew one of the side effects was excessive bleeding. So every morning when I got up, I was spitting up a lot of red mucus, but I assumed it was from the Xarelto, and unbeknown to me, it was from the tumor, because one of the telling signs of the tumor is that you're spitting up blood.
We're going to talk about some of the advantages you had in being able to manage this. But one of them is that you're right there in Houston, and MD Anderson is one of the finest cancer hospitals in the world.
Oh, no question about it. And it's so funny because through the years, I had never had a direct family member go to MD Anderson, but I had recommended MD Anderson to probably a dozen people from our small area, and they had gotten an excellent result.
If you'll forgive me for asking, had you ever had cancer before?
No.
So when you got this diagnosis, was it shocking to you?
Yes and no. I've known so many members of my family not immediate family, but uncles and aunts that had had cancer and had passed away from it. I'd had numerous friends that had died from cancer, had undergone cancer treatment. And I'm a very optimistic person, so I thought this isn't going to be that bad. And then when Dr. Fuller, my radiologist, said it's stage 4, I went, wow, that can't be good. And he said, no, it's in all 4 lymph nodes already, and we have to be very aggressive.
And he recommended a specific type of radiation treatment for you, right?
Yeah, he started the proton radiation at MD Anderson. And at the time I was requesting it, they had been doing it for 16 years. Of course, Blue Cross initially said it was experimental, but he just told me where it was located, that it would do a lot of damage doing traditional radiation, because with the 4 lymph nodes in the tongue area, that it would take a massive dose and could do a lot of harm. He thought I would lose my taste of smell. He thought I'd lose my ability to swallow and have long-term lasting effects. And he just told me that he was a big believer in proton radiation, but he would do regular radiation, but he highly recommended proton radiation. And being the lawyers that we are, Jeffrey, we read everything when we're told there's a medical issue. The more I read about proton radiation, I said, man, this is absolutely the way to go. So I told him, let's do the proton radiation. And he told me give him a couple of days to get it approved, and then we would get started. And then we had 5 turndowns in less than 2 weeks. And I said, look, this tumor is growing, correct? He said, absolutely. I said, I don't want to wait any longer. Go do the proton radiation. So that's how it came about.
So your oncologist at MD Anderson, one of the finest cancer hospitals in the world, says you need this proton radiation therapy as opposed to other kinds of radiation therapy because it's more targeted and will do less collateral damage.
Absolutely correct.
And so you have a medical insurance policy through your law firm, and that was Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, we were paying him money, $28,000 a month for 20-something years.
So you paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Absolutely.
So when you submitted your claim to your insurance company, to whom you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of almost 3 decades, did you tell them that this is urgent, life-saving, necessary care, according to my oncologist?
That's what Dr. Fuller sent him immediately. And it was a moving target, Jeffrey. At first, they said proton radiation was experimental, even though they'd done it for 16 years at MD Anderson. And then they came up and said it's not medically necessary. And then they cited a bunch of articles that were outdated, and it just went on and on. And then Dr. Fuller wrote a 255-page treatises, if you will, with all my records, with all his articles, showing that proton radiation was medically necessary to avoid collateral damage. And still turned down.
So Blue Cross turns down your claim for what your doctor says is the life-saving therapy that you need, that has been a part of standard medical practice, at least at that hospital, for 16 years, because they just concluded that you didn't need it. Is that what happened?
Yeah, and I think they had denied proton radiation throughout Louisiana and other states for a long time. But then in some states, they approved it. When we checked into that, we thought, how ludicrous is this? In some states, you approve proton radiation, and in Louisiana, you don't.
So how much would the proton radiation therapy have cost if they had approved your claim?
That's debatable, because in fairness to Blue Cross now, they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars on my hospitalization at MD Anderson. They paid for the scans, which you have so many scans, it's incredible. Every day you go in, you have blood work. So the only thing that they didn't pay for was the proton radiation.
Which is what you needed to save your life, according to your doctor.
Correct.
And of course, they didn't pay for those hospital stays out of the goodness of the heart. They did it because they're contractually obligated to based on the premiums you paid.
Absolutely.
All right. So before denying your claim, which I understood was 2 days after you submitted, is that right?
Yeah, the 48 hours was the initial denial, and then within 7 to 10 days, it had been turned down another 4 times. Under the ERISA plan, you have to go through all of the appeals or you waive your right to sue them later on, which is another subject that's dear to my heart. If our legislators across the country and our congressmen and our senators don't do something about ERISA, they are leaving us all at the mercy of insurance companies.
We're talking about the Employment, Retirement, Income Security Act.
And if you have, most policies are covered under ERISA. And of course, ERISA doesn't give you the right to seek punitive damages. You have to show that they're basically arbitrary and capricious to be able to override their opinions. And Jeffrey, most lawyers won't touch an ERISA claim because they're not lucrative, and 90% of the time you lose.
But we're going to get to what the legal challenges were, and I appreciate you previewing them. I'm just still baffled by the fact that they denied your claim in a cursory way that they did. Did they ask you to consult with a different physician, one of their choosing?
No.
Did they ask you for more medical record? Something to further?
255 pages.
And that wasn't enough?
That wasn't enough.
All right. They just knew this wasn't medically necessary for you, even though you weren't their patient, and they didn't ask you to consult with any kind of independent medical physician who could make an independent judgment about
I
it.
just wanted to make sure they didn't have to pay for proton radiation.
Now, was proton radiation more expensive than the traditional form of radiation they might have been willing to pay for?
I think the answer is slightly, but not prohibitively so.
Why then do we think they would care?
Because when they do their standard company policy, they want to set a standard that proton radiation wasn't necessary. I've talked to hundreds of people since my article was published that have had similar issues with them, and I think they were just trying to establish a precedent. We also learned from people that have contacted us that Blue Cross, along with United and others, actually have seminars that they teach their claims agent how to deny claims. I think it's an industry-wide policy to try to keep from paying valid claims.
Maybe not so different than insurance companies gouging diabetics out of the price of insulin.
Absolutely.
Now, so you're going through this process where they're just denying your claims summarily because it's company policy. It doesn't really matter what the specific facts of your medical condition and prognosis are. But you said you went ahead and got the treatment. Would you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, it was roughly 3.5 months. It was 60 or 65 rounds of proton radiation. It was 10 rounds of chemotherapy. And proton radiation, they put you in a big mask and they strap you to a table. And there's 3 people doing it in the room at the same time. And they rotate the beam around the room. And there's 3 different sessions where they have to hit it in all 3 different segments of your body. And it takes approximately 45 minutes a session. And I did it some weeks 3 times, some weeks 4 times. And the last week I did it 5 times.
And what were the side effects of your treatment?
Initially, it's not bad. What happens, though, is the cumulative effect of the radiation really starts to burn. You probably see I still have some scarring. It starts to burn incredibly painfully. And they told me when I finished the last treatment, December 24th, the worst is yet to come. And I went, how can the worst be yet to come? I've just gone through all the treatment, but the radiation continues to burn. So for the 2 months after the last treatment, it's horrific. It really is. That's all I can say. You can't swallow. You can't eat solid foods. I lost 100 pounds during the treatment.
And you got a brand new baby girl while you're undergoing all these treatments?
Yeah, 2 months old.
You have remarkable grit, which we're now going to continue to explore together. So you paid out of pocket for your cancer treatments, right?
Correct.
And so how much was the proton radiation therapy that you paid for just out of your bank account?
It was about 96,000 all told, 95,000 and some change.
And you are a very successful attorney with economic resources, and you were able to manage this, right?
Yes, very blessed with a lucrative practice.
Now, having said that, most cancer patients can't afford to shell out almost $100,000 to save their life, can they?
No, and the people that I was in treatment with, they would have, with the regular radiation, they would be hooked up to 2 kind of chemos. They would have deformities in their neck, and I felt so bad for them because it's you become a kindred spirit with other patients. So I'm just a really big believer.
How common is it for patients to try to overturn the coverage denials by their insurance company for healthcare that their doctors say they need?
For a normal attorney, depending on the area, is going to charge anywhere from $300 to $600 to $700 an hour. So, and then normally a Dr. Fuller to write a 255-page report would probably be $100,000 or $50,000. So, to try to recover $100,000, you'd spend at least $250,000, and you have no way to recover unless you win. Now, Dr. Fuller didn't charge me a nickel.
But that's the very problem with tort reform laws anyway, isn't it, right? If you
Absolutely.
take away the right to trial by jury and you cap the damages, then it's not economically viable, and that's exactly what's intended.
Yeah, and how are you going to pursue it? You're going to spend $250,000 and probably lose in ERISA to recover $95,000. It just, they run people out of the business. It's the same thing they did in Louisiana, and they're trying to come with a bunch of insurance reform because we had 2 or 3 hurricanes back to back in the Lake Charles, Hammond area. And none of the insurance companies paid claims. They said, oops, it's water damage. It's not wind damage, it's water damage. Where the water comes from is the wind.
The storm surge, of course.
So the Lake Charles attorneys and the Hammond attorneys just really did a nice job recovering for people down there. Then the penalties made the claims very lucrative. And a lot of the policyholders down there, Jeffrey, were 2 years without their property being repaired. And so now in Louisiana, they're saying, we want to make it where there's no penalties on these claims. Yeah. And I'm hopeful that won't pass. But that's just another prime example of what's going on. Now, if ERISA wasn't there, it'd be a whole different ballgame. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. Dr. Fuller went to Oklahoma and testified in a case where ERISA wasn't involved, and a lady died from the denial of the proton radiation. And the jury there awarded $15 million.
Funny thing
I don't know
happens
where
when you
that
let the
case.
Seventh Amendment do what the Seventh Amendment's supposed to do.
Exactly. And now, and I don't claim one bit that I had anything to do with it, but now proton radiation is approved across the board by Blue Cross Blue Shield and United and Aetna. If I had even this much to do with it, great lawsuit.
Skeeter, you and I know there are no such things as coincidences. You made it too expensive for them to continue to deny what is self-evidently appropriate claim when recommended by a qualified oncologist for head and neck cancer. And so let's talk about what you did there. Most people, they just don't hire a lawyer because they can't find a qualified lawyer because it's too expensive to bring the claim based on what they can recover. But because you had the economic resources, you were able to do. Would you tell us what you did?
Yeah, I initially filed a suit in Natchitoches, my hometown, because I really at the time wasn't aware that my plan was ERISA. I've got a childhood friend named Ronald Corcoran who served as my special master on TVM and other cases. He and I probably tried 100 cases against each other through the years in a small town. So I said, hey, we need to file this lawsuit. And he said, okay, let's do it. And he undertook it, and my office helped him with the research. And then we got it removed to federal court on ERISA. We looked at the language of the policy and had to admit it was a ERISA claim. So then we had to deal with it as an ERISA claim.
This is true legal bipartisanship, right? You're a plaintiff's lawyer and Mr. Corcoran's a defense lawyer, right?
Absolutely.
Just like I'm a plaintiff's lawyer and my wife is a defense lawyer.
And
Right.
I'm surprised he would do it. As many pranks as I played on him through the years. He's a real serious guy, but a really good lawyer.
Oh, that's awesome. How were you feeling? Were you able to participate in this process, or were you really having to rely on other people in your office at the time?
I have a partner named Barrett Beasley, who is one of the smartest people, everybody that's ever been around her. She is a research genius, and she assisted Ronald. Plus, we do 90% of what we do, Jeffrey, in federal court.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the federal court guru, because if you can't surf your way around federal court as a lawyer, you can make many fatal mistakes.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very rules-oriented kind of practice as opposed to state court practice, which can be more relaxed, especially in circumstances where the judge is familiar with the lawyers and people have to try to get along with each other.
Yeah, there was never one day of testimony in my lawsuit. It was all on the pleadings and all on the record. The Fifth Circuit ruled on the records. The defendants asked for oral arguments. They denied it, and then the magistrate made the judge the ruling in my case initially based on the record, and then the district court judge affirmed it.
So just to break this down for members of our audience who aren't lawyers, there's no jury under an ERISA claim. It's tried to the judge, in this case, a federal court magistrate, which is like an assistant judge, right?
Correct.
And this judge decided the case just based on the evidence that was submitted in writing by both sides, right?
Correct. He cited Dr. Fuller 16 times in his 19-page opinion.
The trial court judge issues this opinion very much in your favor. But whereas in a civil case, you would normally have to just prove your case by preponderance, or what you and I tell juries is more likely than not. Here, you had a much higher burden of proof under ERISA, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You basically have to show they're arbitrary and capricious is the term I think best describes it.
No basis in reason
No,
for denying your claim.
no.
And you met that standard.
Thanks to Dr. Fuller. And I don't mean this disrespectful to doctors in general, but Jeffrey, most doctors don't want to fool with litigation. They want to treat you, and somebody in their staff will send in a medical record if you request it. But he felt so strongly about proton radiation that he got actively involved in my case.
He was such a patient advocate for the importance of this therapy and for your health and for those of others that have had neck cancer that he just couldn't let this stand. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think ultimately he won out. I think Dr. Fuller won out, not Skeeter Salim.
Wow. Now, after you won, Blue Cross appealed this to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Correct.
How would you characterize the Fifth Circuit Court's reputation among plaintiffs' lawyers like you and me?
Oh, I would say on the record, they were very fair. They were so well reasoned in their opinions. And then I would say that every plaintiff lawyer tries to stay the hell away from the Fifth Circuit.
That was a very lawyerly answer.
They're notoriously conservative by reputation.
How surprised and elated were you when they affirmed the trial court judgment in your favor that Blue Cross Blue Shield had abused its discretion, had exercised no basis in reason in denying coverage for your claim?
Actually, I wasn't surprised at all, because the district judge that ruled in our favor is a extremely conservative judge that had upheld 4 or 5 ERISA denials in the past. And we were really not optimistic at the district court level. But when we won in front of the district judge, as well as the magistrate, and he really wrote a well-reasoned opinion, I thought we were in good shape.
If Blue Cross had paid for the proton radiation therapy at the beginning, if they had approved the claim, how much would they have had to pay?
That's a really good question because they claimed it was $35,000, but then 2 days before briefs were due, they tendered another $40,000 and said that they had not calculated it accurately. So they never shared with us what they should have paid MD Anderson because they don't share that with you. So right as we were getting ready to go back to court, they were saying with interest it was $75,000. So they changed all the way along. And so we really don't know because they were supposed to show up in court and prove what their plan was and what they would have owed under the plan with MD Anderson. We don't know. All we know is that they initially tendered $43,000, which was the $35,000 plus interest. And then yesterday, on Monday, they tendered another $40,000. And then Monday afternoon, the court ruled, said they didn't want a hearing, that they owed me $95,000 plus interest. But what I had never seen, Jeffrey, you ever seen a federal court give them 3 days to satisfy the judgment?
No, sound to me like he'd had enough of them.
Yeah, I think
He'd seen enough. We'll be very interested to see, because I know for you, it's not about the money, it's about the principle.
I'm sure they'll appeal it to the Fifth Circuit.
I was going to say, but for them, it's absolutely about the money because it's not exactly the 95 grand versus the 75 grand, the 43 grand. It's about all the other proton radiation therapy submissions.
Probably, yeah, because there's a lot of that out there, people that were denied. But like I say, now they pay proton radiation, but they have this little caveat. If it's not medically necessary, they can go to a lesser treatment. Whereas proton radiation is really pinpoint radiation. If you have a cancer in another area of the body that wouldn't do as much collateral damage, I think they would probably still turn down proton radiation.
Have you ever seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, where they kidnapped Liam Neeson's daughter, and it just so happens he's a former CIA agent with a unique set of skills, right?
Yeah.
Don't you think it's providence that they turned down your claim, one of the most gifted plaintiff's trial lawyers in America?
I just think that they're so used to winning under ERISA that they weren't really concerned. But my secretary has been with me for 45 of the 47 years, and she said, "Are you really going to file this lawsuit?" And I said, "What do you think?" And she laughed and she said, "Hell yes."
What should your experience teach us about the importance of the civil justice system?
That it can work, it will work, and you can make changes. And sometimes the monetary amounts are not as important as tackling the issue. Because as we sit here today, almost 6 years later, proton radiation is in vogue, and maybe it's some other kind of treatment. Most treatments start out, maybe some of the more complicated ones as experimental treatments, and it's really important not to give up. What I've been absolutely amazed at, Jeffrey, when they asked me to do this, I thought, you really think anybody cares about Skeeter Salim and Nitrish's treatment and fight with Blue Cross? And Christian Miller said, yeah, I think it'll be a good story. Since it's been published, I have 688 people have reached out to me with similar experiences of being denied treatment or being shit on, if you excuse my French. And I've answered every one of them. At first, I thought I'll answer the first couple because there won't be many. But every one of them I've encouraged to seek counsel or to not give up. Unfortunately, in most of the cases, their time limits had expired or they had given up. But we can't just lay down and roll over when a wrong is out there. I think we have to fight. And that's why, I don't know how you feel, Jeffrey. I'm so damn proud to be a trial lawyer and a plaintiff lawyer. I'm 72. I hope I can do this to 92 because it gives me great joy to help people.
You said it perfectly. You and I are lucky, and We don't do this so that we can buy this or drive that car. We can do all that. We do this because we believe in it. It is not just a job, but our life's work.
But it's important to fight. If we just roll over as citizens, and I'd love to see if I could unite the country in trying to overturn ERISA. Why is it that an insurance company is presumed right by law? Why is it if they're arbitrary and capricious, you can't get anything but what you paid out? What fairness is that the law says, okay, we're going to give you all the bias. Everything's in your favor, insurance company. And name me one broke insurance company in the healthcare industry.
Well, listen, you and I are both governors of the American Association of Justice. Maybe we just go do something.
I just would like to see it because the risk is horrible.
Yeah, it is. And
they'd have paid several $1 million on this claim if it wasn't an ERISA claim. Because if you put Dr. Fuller in front of a jury, he annihilated him in Oklahoma. He absolutely annihilated him.
This is the problem with tort reform all across the board. Of course, it leads to unjust outcomes and it undermines the right to trial by jury that was supposed to be guaranteed by the Seventh Amendment. What do you say to politicians who promote laws to make it harder for mistreated patients to pursue their rights in the civil justice system?
I call them disingenuous. How much did we hear about the McDonald's coffee spill? Never was it reported that it was reduced to $5,000 on appeal. How many times did we hear about the lawnmower in Chicago or somewhere in Illinois where the guy was using the lawnmower to cut the hedges, you remember, and cut his foot off or leg or something? Got $3 million. Do we hear about it being reversed on appeal and he got nothing? No. They use those two sound bites, and that's just one of many, to push tort reform.
Peter, what can patients do to better protect themselves against insurance companies who deny claims for life-saving medical care because it's their policy to deny those claims no matter the condition or prognosis of the patient?
I would recommend that from the get-go that you try to establish a good rapport with your doctor, because if your doctor becomes an advocate for you, you have a real good chance of having the claim paid. I would hope and wish that if you had a choice of being under ERISA or not, you would choose not to be. But so many group plans, you have no choice. But if you're a member of a group, you don't have a choice on what plan governs. But I would tell employers that really care about their patients to not be under ERISA, to have a plan that's not governed by ERISA. That would be a huge thing that we could do.
Employer-insured plans should just not be under ERISA. Pick a different insurance.
Because I promise you, Jeffrey, if you would have read the 500 plus texts and emails that I got, if it wasn't under ERISA, the bad faith that was in those emails, and you and I and every plaintiff lawyer would have taken those cases. And I would tell any plaintiff lawyer, if they have a bad faith claim, to contact these whistleblowers about the schools they have to deny claims and to put that in front of juries and to try to get as much in punitive damages as they possibly can. And maybe if they get hit hard enough, they'll change their practice. But they haven't changed their practices in the last decade.
Skeeter, you going to write a book about this? About your?
No, I'm not that art.
What do you want our audience to know or learn from your experience, but I failed to ask you?
One, cancer is not a death sentence. Two, that it's very important to find a treatment center that understands cancer. I've seen so many of these. Every little town now has a cancer treatment center, and I don't think a lot of them have the expertise. I see a lot of people that I know that have not come through the same type cancers that are cured at MD Anderson and Mayo Clinic. And, and I'm certainly not saying there's not good regional health care, but I would encourage them to find the very best treatment available. I would tell them to look at their insurance policy before they need it. to see what it covers, to see what it doesn't cover, because it's just uninsured motorists. I know as a rural country lawyer starting out, I was aghast at how many people had waived uninsured motorist coverage because their agent had told them, you don't need that. The law requires you to have insurance. So they would have a tort feeser who had zero insurance or minimum limits, and they'd have a huge claim, and they would have waived their UE because their agent told them, you don't need it. So I would hope we could educate the public. See, that's my big criticism of the trial lawyer group as a whole, Jeffrey. And when I was on the trial lawyer board in Louisiana, we're always fighting after the fact. We never tackle the issues head on. We never try to educate the public about why our position is what it is and why we're not just a bunch of greedy lawyers, why you need to have uninsured motorists, why you need to look at your insurance policies and try to educate the public. What we do is when we get hit with tort reform, then we react. I think if years ago we would have been more proactive, we wouldn't have faced some of the hurdles we face now.
I agree with that.
When we're injured as lawyers, we go into mass tort, we go into other areas, we survive, we thrive. But the poor people that are harmed by tort reform, they're screwed. They have nowhere else to go. If their hurricane claims pay them 20 cents on a dollar of their loss, they usually never can build another house. If they're horribly injured in an automobile accident, they try to get Social Security. When they were making good money, all of a sudden they're trying to live on Social Security. So I would think we as lawyers need to be better advocates also, Jeff.
But you're too humble and more artful than you believe, because I just wrote a book called Last Rites about what you and I do for a living and why it matters and how it protects public safety and how tort reform is a scam that harms public safety, although you said it better than I wrote it.
Oh, I doubt that.
Oh, listen, God bless you and keep you, Skeeter. I thank you for coming on our show, for the courage and for the leadership you've shown us. You are, as I said, a remarkable son of a bitch, and we're really proud of you, man.
If I did any small part in helping on proton radiation, it's my honor and my pleasure.
Amen.
Thank you to my guest, the indomitable Robert Skeeter Salim, for sharing an inspiring journey and shedding light on the importance of using his privilege, his access, and his skill to find justice for everyone. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this remarkable episode of Outside Counsel. If you've been moved by Skeeter's story, remember that each of us holds the potential to make the difference, whether it's in a courtroom or in philanthropy or just living our everyday lives. Standing up for what's right matters. On the next episode of Outside Counsel, I'm joined by my friend and legendary trial lawyer, Randy Johnston, who shares with us his wild experience facing off with a big drug company on behalf of a genuinely mistreated but unsympathetic client, and other hard lessons he's learned from trying lawsuits against powerful companies for almost half a century. This podcast is produced by Shannon McDees of Revel and Convey and Larry Shavana. The opinions expressed on Outside Counsel are neither legal nor medical advice. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers, guests, experts, and/or host. They do not expressly nor necessarily reflect the opinion of any institution with which I am or ever have been a member and should never be attributed as such. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Outside Counsel. I'm Jeffrey B. Simon.